Hello, and today I'm gonna do a little horror video essay, but I do want to say sorry I don't upload that much these days. I'm really busy, and there is a podcast episode coming, so I'm not trying to get everyone's hopes up because it's probably going to be another few days, but yeah. I do want to say in this video there will be some really kind of disturbing, crazy imagery that might unsettle you or scare you. And some people watch my videos and they don't like horror, so that's just a little warning. So yeah, just a little warning. It's gonna get really freaky. Genuinely, some of the things in this video scare me really badly, and I have to skip it sometimes when I'm watching it. When I was making clips for this, when I was trying to find clips, I was fast forwarding. I was terrified. So yeah, I feel old on the internet. I'm 22 and I feel old. That's not because I am old. That's because the internet belongs to the youngest generation that exists, that's able to get online at the time. This is because they have the most free time, and they have the most free time. They're not clocking in. They're not really super busy with school, so they own the internet. And that's why you see a lot of big influencers pivot their audience towards kids if they want to make the most money, but that's another video essay. This creates a really unique dynamic where online spaces act like a gladiator battle, where people are not only fighting constantly for relevancy, but also everyone else gets to watch. And it's like this extremely entertaining, crazy clash of personalities that has never existed in the entire history of humanity. And we exist at that time. I hate the internet. I love the internet. I owe the internet probably everything I know about my hobbies, because I wouldn't know a lot about my hobbies if it weren't for the internet. I can't find about 1,000 million resources, books, etc. at a library or a bookstore. Some of this shit's only online. Half of my friends are online friends, at least. And half of my job is on the internet, and the rest of my job is work from home job. So yeah, I owe the internet everything. But I do have a deep hatred for it sometimes. I think a lot of us are embarrassed about being internet savvy because it kind of insinuates that you grew up a little losery and guilty. Yeah, it insinuates that you've been on the internet for a really long time. But as long as you have your algorithm whipped into shape, you have a crazy fucking tool on your hands. You have one of the most powerful tools on your hands that anyone's ever had in your lineage. You have more connection, more access to education than anyone has ever had in your entire timeline of ancestors. But all of that chaos and intimacy and immediacy is why internet horror works so well. And I want to talk about today why I think internet horror is the spiritual successor to the horror of the 70s and before that. And I think mainstream horror is an entirely different beast that no one is really talking about. I think internet horror will always be scarier than what is shown to us in the mainstream, at least in the last 5 years, maybe the last 10 years. And obviously, there are exceptions to this, and I'm going to get into that. But I want to talk about how the internet demands the next best thing so fast that you can't keep up with that kind of improvement upon the next in such a relentless way. I remember being 13 and listening to those creepypasta, really corny, stupid YouTube videos and scaring the shit out of myself. I genuinely was so scared. I followed weird Instagram accounts from the Stone Age of Instagram when they had the blue interface, and I would read fan stories about Jeff the Killer and random shit like that. What always really, really, really scared me was Smile Dog. That's so dumb. But I remember I was in the maybe middle school, and my friends would put it on their phones and show it to me, and I would get extremely scared because I was so scared of it. But horror on the internet has been progressing since way before I was watching creepypastas. And I think now what is available with indie horror, specifically what's available online, and this includes games too, so much beyond that now. And it's turned from like cringy things that aged badly to things that are actually so horrifying and have gone beyond the medium that mainstream horror allows. And it seems like internet horror runs on like kind of a meritocracy, where obviously mainstream horror does not run on a meritocracy whatsoever. Like literally, if you saw Imaginary last year, you know that. But it's like a pseudo meritocracy culture where anyone can create something that is extremely scary if they have the will and the creativity, and you need such minimal resources to do so. My argument today is that analog indie horror found online and for free is genuinely so much more frightening than what's in the movie theaters, what's on TV, and what's in the mainstream. And I'm not going to compare like obviously production design and like character building, acting and stuff like that, because these internet creators don't have access to that. But in the ability to build up suspense, to frighten and to disturb, I think internet horror has mainstream horror beat so hardcore that the mainstream has completely given up on being scary. What's in the movie theaters and what's like on streaming services right now is kind of recycling folktale and cryptid kind of creatures like folklore monsters, vampires, zombies, etc. And those can work so beautifully as a metaphor. Like Nosferatu is just such a great movie. The metaphor works so beautifully. But let's be fucking honest, like vampires are not scary anymore. I would venture to say zombies are not scary anymore, at least to like the extremely horror obsessed audience. A lot of these monsters have lost their appeal, and not lost their value, but lost their scare factor. It seems like the mainstream horror media has been operating on like a studio logic, like what's going to make the most money. We know that. And I'm not dissing mainstream horror because look around, but there must be a reason that I'm not frightened when I go to see a horror movie anymore. 10% of the time when I go to see a horror movie in the theater that's a new horror movie, I'm actually quite frightened and I'm scared. And when I watch indie horror, something online, or even like something on my fucking TikTok, I'm genuinely scared and I'm frightened. There must be some kind of reason that studio horror has given up on trying to innovate into the next frightening thing. Internet horror is scarier because it follows less rules. And horror is inherently the most experimental genre. It always has been. So today I want to talk about why I think what's playing in the theaters and what's on streaming services is going to be a few beats behind, and what the future is of what we actually find frightening as horror enjoyers. And I don't want to speak for the general population because I do know some people still think that slashers are scary, but speaking for myself, I'm not really scared by vampires anymore. Like I think I haven't been in a really, really, really long time. I think the first thing to recognize is that studios have fundamentally changed their approach in what movies they greenlight. There's obviously a tighter economy, and it's like a pressure cooker to generate like the hugest profit possible in every aspect of our lives. And studios are just less likely to take risks on experimental films. I think Skinamarink slid through the cracks because it was such an indie production that made it big, but that's like completely an anomaly and it didn't happen twice. The Exorcist came out in 1973 and it was so deeply controversial for its time. It made people faint in the theater, it was banned from multiple countries, but it became the first horror movie ever nominated for Best Picture. And if the studio didn't take that risk, it wouldn't have won, obviously. But for a studio to take a risk on a movie that is so disturbing, it hasn't really been done ever before, and it's getting banned in other countries, to actually take the risk to make that movie or to distribute it or whatever, that is like something that just does not happen now. Like if you can really transport yourself back to when The Exorcist was being released, that was like the cusp of horror. Like no one had ever thought of anything that disturbing being put on the screen before, at least in the general population. Now, the average budget for a studio horror movie is over $30 million. That's not a place to do experiments anymore. That's like a lot of fucking money. That's a corporate asset that is needing to make money. And if it doesn't, then everyone's fucked. When that much money is involved, you don't take risks and you don't distribute movies that are extremely experimental and are getting banned in multiple countries and making people pass out. Studio executives, they want people to show up to the theater and they don't want like creeping dread and like surreal pacing, and they don't want these things that most audiences have never seen before because they don't know if that will make money or not. Also, elephant in the room, there is a giant fucking franchise problem. That means like sequels, reboots, etc. And if you compare that even to like 2007 and the 90s, Paranormal Activity in 2007 had a $15,000 budget and it made $193 million in the box office. The Blair Witch Project from 1999 had a $60,000 budget and made $248 million at the box office. Risk used to work. So, like, why did studios stop taking risks? Well, let's find out. I think, first of all, it's incredibly hard to break into the film industry as a filmmaker, and even when you do, your vision and your writing and your direction is not fully trusted. For example, the 2019 remake of Pet Sematary had 4 alternate endings, and they were all test screened by the studio to gauge audience reaction, and none of those were the director's original vision. So how fucking annoying is that? And this isn't like a new thing, people not respecting directors' wishes, like we know this, but it's really, really ramped up because of the amount of pressure that movies are under to perform really, really, really well. And personally, I'm the type of person to say, do it anyway. Like, I really do believe in that. If that's your script, if that's your movie, like, you're going to be so mad at yourself if you don't try, so just try. But still knowing that the numbers are against a lot of people, especially if you don't live in the right area and you don't have the right connections. The average cost of an indie movie is $250,000 to $500,000. I can't afford that. Are you actually kidding me? And like, I know you obviously need investors and backers when you have a movie being made, but most people like see that number and they say that's out of reach for me. You need connections, money, time, extra free time, and some really do make it and get really fortunate, but that Brandy Melville door is getting skinnier. It's getting really tight to get through. How many like talented horror visionaries are completely left out of the system?
Where are the thinkers?
So with that industry being what it is, it being very hard to be a filmmaker and AI kind of taking a lot of jobs and writing shitty scripts, mainstream horror is kind of like a rotting corpse at this point with a few gems in it. So I think what is happening is a lot of like really talented horror visionaries that are extremely good at creating dread, suspense, and like frightening me genuinely. They're flocking to free alternatives to making like your mainstream movie. The YouTube views for the Mandela Catalog, which is like an analog horror series, are 80 million total. That's like so many people showing up to the box office. The TikTok views for hashtag analog horror are at 600 million and counting. And I'm gonna get to those in a bit, but first I want to talk about the tropes that mainstream horror relies on and why I think that they're stale. And I'm not to say that they're bad. I just think that the fright has been injected out of a lot of movies. I've kind of personally seen a pattern, like I watch everything, and I'm seeing this pattern where studios are leaning on really classic tropes to scare people, like lots of like corny blood and gore, zombies, vampires, werewolves, big teeth, like extreme violence and classic monster behavior. But at least to me, like, these are not scary things to me. And I can enjoy the movie so much, but if it doesn't bring something new as a horror movie, because when you're making a horror movie, it needs to bring something fresh. If it doesn't bring something fresh that's trying to scare me, it's not going to, because it's like, you've seen these tropes so many times. It reminds me of that scene in The Office when Gabe says,
"Yeah, it seems like there isn't a narrative." Maybe the filmmaker realized that even narrative is comforting.
He's right. And there should be a place and like films for people that like classic horror and they like monster movies and they like slashers. but where are the films for people that actually want to push the envelope of what frightens people in 2025? Longlegs is the most obvious one I'm going to pick at right now because it took a lot from internet culture and it seemed like it was building to something really kind of analog horror vibe or like a mimic vibe. Like it really had that like vibe to me, and it was building up to something like that. And then it just relied on like the classic horror trope of like creepy dude and like scary creepy doll, and it was unique in its way, but it did flop the ending, and that's like a pretty big consensus among everyone. Nosferatu, again, was an incredible movie. It's 5 out of 5 stars, 10 out of 10 movie. But was it frightening? I don't think it was. Beautiful and extremely well directed and written, but there was no scenes where I was like covering my eyes scared. And you would think like the hugest horror coming out of a studio at the time would at least try to frighten you in a way that's unique. I do have to give it credit though. If you were actually on set with Bill Skarsgård, I think, I'm forgetting his name, but if you were actually on set with him dressed as Nosferatu, you'd be scared as fuck. I do know that, like I can feel that in my heart, but on the screen it's like very classic vampire tropes that we've seen a lot of times before. I just saw Sinners the other day, and that was, I think, the most entertaining and amazing movie I've seen in a bit, but that was not scary. I fear that was very sexy. That wasn't scary. I don't think Sinners was trying to be scary, to be fair, but it is a horror movie. We know how I feel about the monkey, and I despised it, but still, like, it was super gory, but it's a testament to how desensitized we are to that type of horror, because people were just like saying how much fun it was, and like not that, oh, I was queasy, I was grossed out. Nobody felt that way. And it was so overly gory. Like gore with no suspense, just, it's so flat. Our new releases this year include 28 Years Later, which I'm so excited for, but let's be honest, like it is a franchise. Megan 2.0, what? Which is just like a faux innovative way to portray creepy girl doll, which is like beating a rotting dead horse corpse at this point. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which Five Nights at Freddy's 1 really pissed me off, but like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, can we please make an original story? Black Phone 2, Clown in a Cornfield, The Conjuring Last Rites. These are all IP franchises, or they're just rehashing a dead trope. And it just seems like there's an unequal split between hardcore horror fans and then like the general public. And they're trying to market horror into this general public thing where it's what most people are scared of and not what people that love horror are scared of. And I think this situation that's going on with new releases, along with internet-born scary things having less guardrails and basically no rules, makes it so much more frightening. And there's a few other reasons why internet horror is just more frightening. Firstly, online horror is just closer to the people, and it more accurately portrays what is scaring us and frightening us, I think, because these creators are most likely just regular people, and they're also most likely interacting with a lot of regular people every day. Mainstream horror sometimes just does not feel like it's at all connected with the general public. There are obviously a ton of exceptions to this. There are some fantastic, really culturally significant movies that have come out in the past year, but with such an exclusive club that it is to be a filmmaker, and with the amount of revisions and rewrites really great filmmakers already get, making something culturally significant and culturally in tune is actually almost fucking impossible. It's actually a miracle if it does happen, and that's a crazy thing to say about a film that's supposed to be like the living, breathing asset to what's going on in culture at the time. For example, COVID was like a mass trauma event. That shit changed the way that we perceive everything. It like racked our world. It fucked up a lot of kids because they were like, where's school, you know? My graduation was like the most weird, uncanny crap ever. We had to be like separated and have masks on, and I didn't really get to say bye to my friends. I didn't have a prom, shit like that. But that's almost never portrayed in like the mainstream now. Like, why is that event that happened 3 years ago? There's nothing portraying the depth of trauma that caused everybody. And we see it in day to day, like people are stranger, people are more likely to be aggravated by things, like the public has been affected by it, but it's not seen in like the genre that's supposed to show us what's fucking people up right now. And then internet horror is like dissecting it in a huge way. Internet horror is dissecting the feeling of being alone, the world feeling unfamiliar, and ruminating on a life we were promised as children but seems like is a totally different universe than where we are today. Nostalgia, liminal space core that's like really popular online. I think horror platforms like YouTube and TikTok respond to like real-time fears where it's happening in the moment and they're just easier to respond to and faster. So you have like these really reflective pieces of horror that are so much more affecting than a werewolf. The Backrooms, which is like an analog horror series, which is probably the most famous one, really got popular around 2022 when people were reflecting on the pandemic. And I think it mirrors our COVID trauma of being stuck and also like feeling surveilled in a way and then feeling lost. And I think cinema just like lags behind in this way. It's not a really fast feedback loop between like what's going on with people and then like how that reflects in a genre made to be full of fear. Another reason why internet horror is so fucking scary is that there are no rules for runtime, for content. I mean, there's obviously community guidelines, but like you can get away with some pretty gory stuff. And it also punishes not only stealing ideas, but it punishes complacency. The internet is so hardcore. Films have to follow like a 3-act structure. Usually they have to follow run times. They have to follow like, oh, you need a story that makes really logical sense. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of movies are like placating to really stupid audiences by showing flashbacks in moments that don't need them to remind the audience what happened. That happened in Sinners. Like there was moments where they would have to show physically a flashback to before in the movie so people could remember characters and events. And that's like such a crazy suspense killer. And especially as a movie enjoyer, I'm like, that's not going to age well. No complaints about that movie though. Hello? Analog horror, internet horror, and indie games have the luxury of like having completely unpredictable run times, unpredictable structure, and that is so much more frightening to a viewer than something they can predict. Like you could be watching a indie horror media and never know when anything's going to happen, and that's so much more unsettling and so much more frightening than going to the theater and just kind of being able to predict what's going to happen. Even if you don't watch a lot of movies, they're all following this kind of same structure. Last reason it's scarier is that there's just more competition and there's more feedback. The algorithm is a ruthless beast that rewards your content if it drives engagement, etc. You must innovate and you must shock to stand out. And that's the total opposite thing that happens with studios, because they only really greenlight things that they know audiences are going to like, versus indie creators are just making things that they're hoping are unique and innovative enough to scare everybody and get more engagement that way. And the creators are so plugged into internet culture usually, or they're more accessible, that people are commenting direct feedback, they're listening, and they're innovating that minute, versus like studios don't really do that. Like they're just worried about how much money it's going to make, and that doesn't really reward what's the most frightening. So you have mainstream horror that's testing with a focus group of people, and then indie horror is like building it with the group who's already extremely tuned in and who's extremely desensitized to horror in general. So now that I've talked about all my opinions and everything I think about indie horror, now I want to talk about what is the scariest universes and things happening online to me. And I do want to be totally honest, these frighten me and mainstream horror doesn't. I'm so desensitized to claws, blood, teeth, vampires, zombies. I'm like, whatever. But I'll be watching one of these YouTube videos or playing one of these games, and I'm like frightened for my fucking life. I have my stomach drops and I'm scared and I have to turn the comment section up. I obviously have to talk about the back rooms. This is pretty much the most infamous analog horror. It actually has a feature film in development, which I'm so excited for, and that's exactly the kind of thing I want to happen. And I think this series is such a good example of the ingenuity that happens with really young, really like talented horror visionaries online, and what freaky and unique things can happen when you just give someone the resources to make something like this through the means of the internet. It's so impressive. Another one that when I explain it, it's going to sound silly, but it freaked me out. And I'm like a grown-ass woman. I was freaked out. There's this trend going on maybe a couple months ago, maybe it's still happening, on TikTok for a little bit. And it was this combination of My Little Pony, which is like obviously a kid's show, with this like infection kind of in the vein of The Last of Us zombie virus thing. But why I want to talk about this is the art that these creators were putting out onto TikTok were so much freakier and darker and more disturbing than the huge studio zombies getting spit out with series like The Last of Us on HBO. It's like these basically teenagers and really young people are creating this type of horror that is so affecting. And I'm just wondering if maybe it's a combination of things I talked about before, but is it also just studios are really out of touch with how scary things have gotten online and how tough the competition is to scare people. And why I like this example to show you is these are freaky and it's such a silly concept and they're still able to make it extremely freaky and disturbing. I haven't really seen people giving like almost praise to the younger generation, like younger than me, obviously making these, on how creative you have to be to create something like this. This is like studio level character design and very scary zombie design done through probably Procreate or like some kind of clip studio thing, like, and posted on a free platform. Now, this next one is the one that kind of made me want to make this video. The boiled one is a short film, basically. It's basically a short film, and it's like about a cognito hazardous entity. And the idea of a cognito hazard has never been explored in mainstream horror, and it's genuinely so scary, and it's so easy to make scary because it's a thing that cannot physically touch you, but it affects your brain. And you know, you can say this is like The Ring, like this is in the vein of The Ring, but I would say this is the spiritual successor to The Ring, because The Ring still obviously has those classic horror tropes that were really scary at the time of its release, but now are just extremely old. Like things like the boiled one and like this cognito hazard thing is the successor to The Ring. It's the successor to Videodrome almost, where things can affect you through the TV. I don't see that successor in mainstream horror whatsoever, but it's basically about this fucked up thing that affects your brain. And why this scares me so badly is the character design. And the short film itself is very scary. I actually hate it. I'm not going to think about it, but the character design of this is unbelievably freaky. Maybe that's just me, but this is so much scarier to me than like big teeth and like chasing you. I don't know how to explain it. I also want to talk about mouthwashing because it's a perfect example of how you don't need like HD gore to be disturbing and to be effective. And I haven't finished this game. And I probably will have more to say about it when I do, but it literally relies on like this like lo-fi kind of PS1 era graphics to let your mind fill in the blanks for the rest. And that's a lost art in mainstream movies, is they give you everything and they try and make everything as HD as possible, and there's no mystery anymore, it seems like. Indie creators use internet, basically language and trends, to make things that are scarier than things that you can actually make, if that makes sense. When your brain has to fill in the blanks for things, it's so much freakier, and it's on a horror that you can't really touch because your brain is always scarier than what's actually being shown to you because it's personalized. I also have to speak to the accessibility of this game. Delirium kind of sci-fi despair horror that is basically 3 clicks and I think $9 away. Next, I want to talk about Vita Carnis, which is, I think, the scariest video. I show my friends this video when I want to scare them because it scares the shit out of me. I don't know if this is actually practical effects or if it is 3D. I have no idea, but I hate it. I hate it so bad, and I actually am having chills thinking about it. But it basically is an analog horror series that slowly drip feeds you the idea of a universe where humans have to now coexist with a new kind of species of creature. It's basically an ecosystem of skinless animals and then creatures, and they kind of vary from basically skinless raccoons to mimics to cosmic horrors. And the mimics are very scary because they want to eat human flesh, obviously. But they're scary because they can hide and they're patient. And that's kind of a lost art too, I think, with mainstream horror now, is the monsters aren't that intelligent in a way that's uncanny. The idea of a monster that can stalk you is a lot scarier than one who is overly human or overly humanized. I think what happens in horror movies in the past 5 or so years is that the monsters are either too human or they're too animalistic. And what internet horror has done is it's created this new breed of monsters and monster design that feels like something truly alien. I think Alien Romulus touched on this in the very end with that really scary kind of humanoid monster played by that guy who is super tall. But that was just a taste. And this idea has already been tossed around for a couple of years online. That's like truly so innovative. Next one I'm going to talk about is Gemini Home Entertainment. It's very scary, obviously, but it also is a little bit funny because of like the kind of dark comedy of it all. But it basically presents a bunch of educational VHS tapes and like live TV things, like when you're switching through cable, and it slowly reveals an alien plan to terraform the Earth. Slow burn, cosmic horror beyond your comprehension. And it's built into real world things like flipping through cable and real videos of people. Oh my God, it's so fucking creepy. It's like existential terror because it feels like you've come across it in your real life. Like the internet horror has made an expert job of making you feel like you stumbled upon something actually real. There's this video, oh my God, there's this video in this series of this guy taking a video of people that have basically been terraformed into aliens or whatever. And I don't even want to explain it, but the video is like a masterclass in realistic videographer, first of all, because he runs away the minute that he feels like he's going to get seen. But the way that the people move is so uncanny and strange. And if there was a full-length horror movie of something like this, it would actually be so terrifying. I also got to talk about This House Has People in It, and this is like an Adult Swim short film. But the interesting thing about this one is there are like a plethora of other resources adding up to like 2 hours of content that you can dig for online and find. And it's like an experimental like analog series where it's a surveillance of a home of like basically a random middle class family, and it's like suburban paranoia and like weird shit, like the daughter's just laying on the floor and they're making fun of her and being mean to her, and there's deers outside and it's really weird. Gives you this like feeling of dread and feeling of unease, and it touches on horror that I've never felt before. And that is incredible to me, that someone can make a series that makes me feel something so strange and different. It encourages you to get emotionally involved because you're looking for all the other clips, you're looking for the lost media of it, and then it's like you become involved in this and you're even more emotionally open. And it seems like films in the theater have a hard time getting you to open up to like the possibility of things happening in the real world. Whereas internet analog horror, you immediately just believe it and you put yourself in there because it's so easy to. It seems like you've stumbled upon it. I think the scariest one that I'd recommend for like a new person coming into analog horror is this video. I think it's maybe, I don't know if it's one video or if it's a series, I'm forgetting, but it's called The Rolling Giant, or The Oldest View. I forget which one it's actually named, but it's by the same guy who did The Backrooms, and it's actually unbelievably scary. It's like a decaying, abandoned shopping mall with this rolling creature in it that's it's modeled after a real statue that exists that already is pretty creepy. Not only is this really scary and scares me and my adult friends, but I think this is so affecting because we all feel the loss of malls just in general, the loss of that like early 2000s third space kind of vibe where people hung out at malls and went shopping. Those are rotting away, and this video series is just encapsulates the dread of that, of like an abandoned shopping mall and you're in it and you feel scared, and it's like the feeling that you get when you see an abandoned mall that you used to visit a lot when you were a kid, but it's the deeper feeling within that of like what's happening to our society, where are we going? It's getting freaky. And the last but not least, and also there's a ton of examples I could go into, but I'm just going to talk about one more. The last one's actually an infamous kind of experiment, and it's called Everywhere at the End of Time. I've listened to it, and I genuinely don't recommend listening to it because it is so awful. Oh my god, it's so scary. A 6-album, I think, Soundscape album that portrays what it's like to have dementia. It starts with like 1920s ballroom music, and then it ends into a descent into what I can describe as like a horror, dread-inducing experience of basically losing your mind and your memories. And it is one of the most like triggering, awful things to listen to of all time. But someone created that feeling in me and so many other people with just music, no visuals whatsoever. Well, there's album covers, but I just can't imagine what the guy who made this album series could accomplish if he was given the role of a sound designer in a huge horror film. What I just think about is how much I wish that huge studios and films used inspiration from things like this, because it's so dread-inducing. And if they really want to scare people, traumatize people in a horror movie like they used to in the 70s, making you feel like a deep dread. And it does say something that there is such a massive difference between listening to Everywhere at the End of Time and watching The Monkey. One of them is depicting like violent death, and the other is just like a bunch of albums of music, of ballroom music, and one of them sticks with you probably till the end of your life because you're so horrified by it, and the other one is like whatever, you're not going to think about it in a couple years, and it's so gory and it's so full of death. I think it's just a perfect metaphor for what I think is the future of horror and how it's kind of moving away from theaters, in my opinion, and it's moving into the internet. It's not to say that we're not in a renaissance of horror in theaters, because we completely are, but I would argue that most of these incredible horror movies that are coming out are not frightening. They're not dread-inducing. The new Backrooms movie that's getting distributed by A24, and then also the same people that made Talk to Me are making another movie that's coming out, I think, this year. I think with like introductions like that, with really young, innovative people coming into the horror scene, putting that competition out there into the public, I think that will help. But I do have to ask, like, is it ever going to keep up? Is it ever going to catch up to what the fuck's going on the internet? And that is where I end it for today. Genuinely, if you have never dipped your toe into analog horror and you're not really into being scared, I'm not even being corny. Like, it is extremely scary and frightening, and I honestly wouldn't recommend it to everybody. But if you like experimental horror and you don't need an extremely defined narrative, I recommend it. I just wish there was a world where we could bridge like extremely high production, incredible actors with the fear, despair, and dread that internet horrors can create. I just wish there was a little bit more collaboration there, because it doesn't seem like there is that much. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you for being here, and I hope you have a great night or a great day. Brush and floss your teeth.